Have you ever been thrown out of your own home? On Christmas Eve? With nothing but a suitcase and the clothes on your back? Imagine standing in the freezing cold, watching the front door close behind you, knowing the people inside, your own family, chose someone else over you, not because you did something terrible, but because you simply weren't good enough for them. Now imagine this. Just hours later, after giving your only warm coat to a homeless woman, 19 black luxury SUVs pull up outside your motel. Sounds impossible, right? But that's exactly what happened to me. Welcome, my beautiful family, to Silent Echoes of the Heart, a place where stories don't just entertain, but teach, heal, and inspire. Before we begin, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. To our returning family, thank you for always being here. And to our new viewers, you are deeply welcome. If stories that carry real-life lessons touch your heart, please take a second to subscribe, like, and share, so you never miss the next powerful story. Now, get comfortable, because this Christmas Eve changed my life forever. The day I lost my job started like any other Tuesday: gray sky, overpriced coffee, and a to-do list longer than my patience. San Francisco has a way of making you feel important, while slowly draining your soul. The buildings are tall, the rents are higher, and everyone walks like they're 10 minutes late to becoming a millionaire. I used to be one of them. For 6 years, I worked at one of the most prestigious advertising agencies in the city. Glass walls, rooftop meetings, clients with logos you'd recognize from across the world. On paper, it was the kind of job that made parents proud at dinner parties. In reality, it was 80-hour weeks, impossible deadlines, and the constant fear that someone younger, cheaper, and more connected was waiting to take your seat. Still, I stayed. Because that's what I'd been taught to do. Work hard, stay loyal, and eventually things would pay off. That morning, I noticed the tension as soon as I walked in. People were whispering near the elevators. My supervisor avoided eye contact. The usual jokes at the coffee machine were replaced with tight smiles and short answers. Then came the email. Subject: mandatory team meeting, 10 a.m. No emojis. No exclamation points. No friendly tone. Just cold. At exactly 10, we were all called into the large conference room, the one usually reserved for big clients. There were catered sandwiches on the table, untouched. That was the first sign something was wrong. No one in advertising ignores free food unless disaster is coming. The HR director stood at the front, holding a tablet like it was a shield. She started with the usual corporate phrases: due to market shifts, strategic restructuring, aligning with future goals, words that sounded important but meant one thing. People were about to lose their jobs. When she finally began calling names, it felt like a twisted game show. Except, nobody wanted to win. Daniel, Carla, Jasmine, each person stood up, face pale, and walked out with an HR escort like they were being quietly arrested. Then she said my name. It didn't feel real at first. I'd stayed late, covered for others, fixed campaigns that weren't even mine. I thought loyalty meant something. Apparently, it didn't. I walked out of the conference room in a haze, escorted to my desk by a polite man in a suit who kept saying, "Take your time," while clearly hoping I wouldn't. 6 years of my life fit into one cardboard box. A small desk plant, a framed photo from my first big campaign, a mug that said "Creative Genius at Work," a gift from a coworker who'd already been laid off. The final insult came when I checked my termination email. "Dear employee," it began. Not even my name. Just employee. I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting to feel angry. But the anger didn't come. Instead, there was this strange, hollow quiet inside me, like someone had unplugged my emotions. Outside, the city kept moving like nothing had happened. Cars honked. People laughed. A street performer played Christmas music on a saxophone. And there I was, standing beside my beat-up Honda Civic, holding a cardboard box that contained the remains of my professional identity. I checked the temperature on my phone. 31 degrees. The weather app said it would drop even lower by nightfall. I didn't know it then, but that number would stick in my memory forever. Because that was the night my life would freeze. And then completely change. The drive to my parents' house normally took 47 minutes. I'd done it so many times I could almost drive it with my eyes closed. That day, with holiday traffic clogging every lane, it took 90 minutes of rehearsing what I'd say. Hi Mom, hi Dad. I lost my job again. But it's just temporary. I just need a place to stay for a couple weeks. I'll figure things out. I kept adjusting the words, trying to make them sound less like failure and more like a minor setback. Because in my family, success wasn't just encouraged. It was expected. And failure? Failure was embarrassing. My parents lived in Hillsborough, one of those gated communities where every house looks like it belongs on the cover of a luxury magazine. Perfect lawns. Perfect cars. Perfect smiles. My father had made his fortune in commercial real estate during the boom years. He was the kind of man who shook hands with billionaires and never loosened his tie. My mother specialized in spending that fortune with elegant precision, charity galas, designer wardrobes, and vacations that required private jets. And then there was my younger sister. She was everything my parents loved. Beautiful, confident, social, the kind of person who walked into a room and instantly became the center of attention. She never struggled, never stumbled, never seemed unsure of herself. She was the golden child. I was the complicated one, not a failure exactly, but never the star. The startup that collapsed, the marketing firm that let me go, and now this. 3 career setbacks in 10 years. To my parents, that wasn't bad luck. It was a pattern. I pulled into the underground parking garage of their mansion and just sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. 32 years old. Tired eyes. Mascara slightly smudged from the stress of the day. Just a couple weeks, I whispered to myself. That's all you need. I grabbed my phone and called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. Hello? Hey Mom, I said, forcing my voice to sound calm. I lost the job. Again. But it's temporary. I just need to stay for a couple weeks while I figure things out. There was a short pause on the line. In the background, I could hear music. Laughter. Glasses clinking. We're having people over for dinner tonight, she said. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. And then she hung up. No, are you okay? No, what happened? No, come inside, we'll talk. Just dinner logistics. I stared at my phone, the screen still glowing in my hand. Something in my chest tightened. But I pushed the feeling down. Maybe she was just busy. Maybe she didn't want to discuss it over the phone. Maybe everything would make sense once I got upstairs. I grabbed my box, locked the car, and headed toward the elevator. The doors slid open with a quiet chime. As I stepped inside, I had no idea that in less than an hour, I wouldn't have a job, a home, or a family anymore. If you'd just lost your job and had to move back in with family, how would you feel? Would you see it as a fresh start? Or a step backward? Let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like the video. It helps more people discover stories that carry real-life lessons. If you've never walked into a house where you already felt like a disappointment, you're lucky. Because there's a certain kind of silence in those homes. Not the peaceful kind. The heavy kind. The kind that reminds you, with every step, that you don't quite belong. My parents' house looked like something out of a luxury holiday magazine that night. A 15-foot Christmas tree stood proudly in the foyer, decorated with ornaments that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. White orchids, my mother's obsession, sat on every polished surface. Soft golden lights reflected off the marble floors. And somewhere in the background, a string quartet recording played softly through hidden speakers. Everything was perfect. Everything. Except me. I stepped inside quietly, hoping to slip upstairs before anyone noticed. But the moment the door shut behind me, I heard laughter coming from the living room. Not just any laughter. Her laughter. My sister had a way of laughing that filled a room. It was bright, confident, and a little too loud. Like she knew everyone was supposed to be watching her. I followed the sound, and that's when I saw her. She was standing near the fireplace, wearing a red dress that hugged her like it had been custom made. Her hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and on her left hand was a diamond ring so large it caught the light like a spotlight. She noticed me immediately. "Oh, look who finally made it," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness that didn't quite reach her eyes. Everyone turned to look at me. My father stood near the bar, opening a bottle of champagne. My mother was adjusting a pearl necklace around her throat, studying her reflection in the mirror. And standing beside my sister, with his arm around her waist, was my ex-boyfriend. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It felt like one of those dreams where nothing makes sense, where people's faces blur together and the rules of reality stop working. But this wasn't a dream. It was him. The same crooked smile. The same expensive watch I'd once saved up to buy him for his birthday. The same eyes that used to look at me like I was the only person in the world. Now those eyes were fixed on my sister. Let me tell you something about heartbreak. It doesn't always arrive as a dramatic explosion. Sometimes, it's a quiet switch being flipped inside you. And suddenly, everything just goes numb. We had been together for 4 years. 4 years of late-night conversations, shared dreams, and cheap takeout dinners when we were both too tired to cook. I supported him when his business ideas kept failing, helped him edit pitch decks at 2 in the morning, talked him down during anxiety attacks before investor meetings. Then one day, at a small coffee shop we used to love, he sat me down and said the words people always say when they're about to break your heart. "It's not you. It's the timing. The timing." As if love were a calendar appointment. 3 weeks later, I found out he was dating my sister. 2 days after our breakup. 2 days. I remember doing the math over and over, like maybe if I counted enough times, it would hurt less. It didn't. And now, here they were, standing in my parents' living room like the king and queen of a kingdom I'd never truly been part of. "Hey everyone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Rough day at work." My sister's eyes lit up with theatrical concern. "Oh no," she said loudly. "What happened this time?" "This time? Not what happened? Not are you okay? Just this time." I swallowed. "They did layoffs, entire creative team. I just need a place to stay for a few weeks while I find something new." She tilted her head, studying me like I was a puzzle she'd already solved. "How many jobs is that now?" she asked, glancing around the room. "Didn't you get fired from that startup for not being a culture fit?" A few of the guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one said anything. My sister lifted her left hand, the diamond ring sparkling under the chandelier. "Well, some of us are doing just fine," she said. "He just closed his series of funding. $28 million valuation." She leaned into him slightly. "The investors are obsessed with him." He gave me a small smile. The same one he used to give when he was right about something trivial. The one that used to make me laugh. Now it just felt like a knife twisting slowly. Growing up, this was always how it went. She'd win a dance competition. I'd get an A on a difficult exam. At dinner, my parents would say, "That's nice, honey," to me. Then they'd turn to her and say, "Our daughter is extraordinary. She got the bigger birthday gifts, the nicer car, the louder applause." And I got expectations. I was supposed to be the responsible one, the practical one, the one who didn't cause problems. I remembered one summer when I was 14. It had started raining suddenly while we were outside. I'd borrowed one of her sweaters from the back seat of the car without asking. When we got home, she realized it was missing. She locked the front door and refused to let me in until I apologized. I stood outside in the rain for nearly an hour while she laughed through the window. My parents called it sibling rivalry. I called it a preview of the rest of my life. Back in the living room, my sister was already pulling out her phone. "Oh, this is too good," she said. "Big sister comes crawling back home on Christmas Eve." She angled the camera toward me. "Say something for my followers." My stomach dropped. "Are you serious?" I asked quietly. 20,000 strangers were about to watch the worst night of my life. For entertainment. I looked at my parents, waiting for one of them to step in. To say something. To remind her that this was still her sister she was humiliating. But my mother was busy adjusting her bracelet. And my father. My father finally looked at me. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't even disappointed. It was something worse. It was decided. We need to talk, he said. Those 4 words landed like a hammer. Because nothing good ever follows. We need to talk. When my father said, we need to talk, the room seemed to shrink around me. The music still played softly in the background. Glasses still clinked. People still laughed. But all of it sounded far away, like I was underwater. My sister lowered her phone, disappointed that the drama had paused. My ex-boyfriend took a sip of champagne, carefully avoiding my eyes. My father didn't ask me to sit. He never did when he was about to hurt me. He just stood there, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a crystal flute of champagne that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Follow me, he said. He walked toward his office at the back of the house. I followed, feeling like I was being led to a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. The office smelled like leather and old books. Everything in it was expensive, heavy, and permanent, just like my father. He closed the door behind us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I noticed the framed photos on the wall. My sister at her graduation. My sister at her first fashion show. My sister cutting the ribbon at some charity event. There were photos of me too, but fewer. Smaller frames, tucked into the corners. Dad, I began, I know things haven't gone perfectly, but I just need a few weeks. I'll find something. I always do. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked around his desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a folder and set it on the surface between us. Thick, cream-colored, official-looking. Last month, he said calmly, I made some changes to the family trust. My stomach tightened. What kind of changes? He slid the folder toward me. All of it, he said. Every asset, every property, every investment. It's all in your sister's name now. For a moment, the words didn't make sense. They floated in the air like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit together. All of it? I repeated. $38 million worth of assets, he said. Irrevocable. Signed, notarized, and filed. My hands felt suddenly cold. But why? I asked. He leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a case file. You're 32 years old, he said. It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet. The words hit harder than the job loss. Because this wasn't a company letting me go. This was my father. Erasing me. I've always stood on my own, I said quietly. I've paid my own rent, my own loans. I've never asked you for money. That's not the point, he replied. Your life has been unstable. One failed job after another, one wrong decision after the next. My throat tightened. Losing a job doesn't make someone a failure. No, he said. But patterns do. Before I could respond, the office door opened. My mother stepped in, still wearing her pearls. She didn't look at me. She just stood beside my father and said, We can't keep funding a lifestyle that doesn't produce results. A lifestyle. As if I'd been lounging on yachts and spending their money on designer handbags. I felt something inside me crack. All I asked for was a place to stay, I whispered. Just for a little while. My father checked his watch. You have 20 minutes to pack what you need, he said. Security will let you back in tomorrow for the rest. You'll make an appointment. An appointment. To collect my childhood. To pack up the pieces of my life like I was a stranger. I stared at him, searching his face for some trace of the man who used to read me bedtime stories. The one who taught me how to ride a bike. The one who cried at my college graduation, but that man wasn't there anymore. Only this cold, distant version of him. Are you serious? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. I turned and walked out of the office, my legs moving on autopilot. Back in the living room, the party was still going. My sister was laughing at something one of the guests had said. When she saw me, her smile widened. "Well?" she asked. "How'd the big talk go?" I didn't answer. I just headed for the stairs. Behind me I heard her whisper to someone, "This is going to be so good." My room looked exactly the same as it had the last time I visited. Swim team photos on the wall. Debate trophies on the shelf. A stuffed elephant I'd won at a carnival when I was 9. Proof that once, a long time ago, I had belonged here. I opened my closet and pulled out a suitcase. My hands moved automatically, packing jeans, sweaters, my laptop, toiletries. What do you take when you're leaving your life behind? What fits into one suitcase when 32 years suddenly don't matter? I paused in front of the shelf and picked up the stuffed elephant. Its fur was worn from years of hugs. For a second, I considered packing it. Then, I set it back down. Some memories were too heavy to carry. 15 minutes later, I zipped the suitcase shut and took one last look around the room. It felt smaller than I remembered. Colder, like it had already forgotten me. When I came downstairs, my sister was standing near the front door, her phone in hand. "Oh, perfect timing," she said, hitting a button on the screen. "I'm live." My heart sank. She angled the camera toward me as I reached the bottom step, suitcase in hand. "And here she is," she said in a cheerful voice. "Big sister, freshly unemployed, moving back home. Or maybe not." A few of the guests chuckled awkwardly. "Taking bets," she continued, "on how long before she's sleeping in that beat-up Honda." I looked at my parents. My mother studied a Christmas ornament like it was the most fascinating object in the world. My father walked to the front door and opened it. Cold air rushed in. The fog outside had grown thick, swallowing the driveway in white silence. He stepped aside. That was it. No hug. No apology. No second thoughts. Just an open door. And the cold, waiting outside. I picked up my suitcase and walked toward it. As I stepped onto the marble porch, my sister's voice followed me. "Merry Christmas," she sang. "Don't freeze." The door shut behind me with a soft, expensive click. Then the alarm chirped, twice. Locked. In less than 30 minutes, I'd gone from daughter to stranger. The cold hit me like a slap the moment the door closed behind me. It wasn't just the temperature. It was the silence. Inside that house there was warmth, music, laughter, and the smell of expensive food. Outside, there was only fog, darkness, and the faint crunch of frost under my shoes. For a few seconds, I just stood there on the marble steps, suitcase at my feet, staring at the closed door. Waiting, not for an apology, not even for a hug. Just for someone to open it again. But no one did. The golden light from the windows made the fog glow softly, like a postcard version of Christmas. Somewhere inside, I could hear laughter again. Someone clinked a glass. The party had resumed. Just like that, I had been erased from it. I checked my phone again. 27 degrees. The number felt personal now, like it was mocking me. I zipped my coat tighter around my body. It was the warmest thing I owned. A long, dark cashmere coat I'd saved 3 months to buy. At the time, it felt like a reward. Proof that I was finally becoming the kind of adult who could afford nice things. Now it felt like armor. I picked up my suitcase and walked down the driveway. The fog swallowed the house behind me until even the lights disappeared. It was strange how quickly a place could stop feeling like home. The streets of the gated community were quiet. Every house looked like a Christmas card. Perfect decorations, glowing windows, trees sparkling with lights. Through one window, I saw a family gathered around a dining table, passing dishes and laughing. Through another, a couple danced slowly to a Christmas song in their living room. In one yard, a little boy ran toward his father, holding a wrapped present, his face lit up with excitement. I kept walking. Each warm, glowing window felt like a reminder of what I'd just lost. My fingers started to go numb first. Then, my toes. The cold crept in slowly, like it was trying to convince me to stop moving. But I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I'd have to think, and if I thought, I might break. So, I walked. The wheels of my suitcase made a soft, rattling sound against the pavement. It echoed through the empty streets like a lonely drumbeat. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay there. After about 20 minutes, I reached the edge of the neighborhood. The security gate loomed ahead, tall and silent. The guard barely glanced at me as I passed through. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was okay. No one cared. Outside the gates, the streets were darker. The houses smaller. The decorations simpler. But somehow, it felt more honest. I kept walking until I reached a small public garden beside an old stone church. The iron gates were open, and a single street lamp cast a pale circle of light over a wooden bench. My legs felt heavy. My hands were stiff from the cold, so I walked over to the bench and sat down. The moment I did, everything I'd been holding in finally broke loose. I bent forward, elbows on my knees, and cried. Not the quiet, polite kind of crying. The ugly kind. The kind where your shoulders shake and your chest hurts and you can't catch your breath. The kind that makes you sound like a wounded animal in the dark. I cried for the little girl who used to believe her parents loved her no matter what. I cried for every birthday where my sister got the bigger present, and I was told to be grateful. I cried for every job I worked myself to exhaustion trying to prove I was worth something. And I cried because, after 32 years of trying to be good enough, it still wasn't enough. The cold air stung my cheeks. My tears felt like ice on my skin. I hugged my arms around myself and stared at the ground. That's when the realization hit me. I hadn't been kicked out because I'd failed. I'd been kicked out because I wasn't her. Simple as that. My sister was beautiful, successful, and socially perfect. She made my parents proud at every party, every fundraiser, every dinner with their wealthy friends. I was the one with messy career paths, complicated emotions, and a life that didn't look good on a brochure. And in my parents' world, image was everything. The thought sat heavy in my chest. I didn't know how long I stayed there on that bench. 10 minutes. Maybe 30. Time felt strange in the cold. All I knew was that I had no home, no job, and barely enough money for a few nights in a cheap motel. And Christmas was just hours away. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my coat and took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Okay, I thought. You've survived worse. You'll figure this out. But even as I told myself that, I didn't really believe it. The night felt too cold. The world felt too big. And I felt completely alone. That's when I heard it. Soft footsteps. Shuffling. Bare feet against cold pavement. I looked up slowly, my eyes adjusting to the dim light beyond the street lamp. An elderly woman was walking toward the bench. Her silver hair was wild around her face, and her clothes were thin, far too thin for the freezing weather. Her skin had a grayish tint, the kind that comes when the cold starts to take over. Her feet were bare, purple at the toes. She stopped a few feet away, swaying slightly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice rough and quiet. "Do you know if any of the shelters still have space? I've been walking from the next town over. Everything's full." I swallowed, my throat tight. "I'm sorry," I said softly. I don't have anywhere to go either." She studied my face for a moment, then nodded with gentle understanding. Without another word, she walked to the other end of the bench and sat down, leaving a polite space between us. We sat there in silence. Two strangers. Two broken lives. One freezing Christmas Eve. And for the first time since I'd been thrown out, I realized I wasn't the only one hurting that night. If you were sitting on that bench, cold, alone, and with almost nothing left, what would you do next? Tell me honestly in the comments. And if this story is touching your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. The street lamp above us flickered once, then steadied. Its pale yellow light fell across the bench, catching the frost on the wooden slats. The air felt so cold it almost burned when I breathed in. The elderly woman sat quietly beside me, her thin shoulders trembling under the weight of the night. Up close, I could see the deep lines in her face, lines carved by years of hardship, loss, and weather. Her feet were worse than I'd thought. The skin had turned a strange purple-white color, the kind you only see in medical diagrams or warning posters. I remembered a campaign I'd once worked on about frostbite. Stage 1. numbness. Stage 2, discoloration. Stage 3, permanent damage. I looked down at my own shoes, then back at her bare feet. A knot formed in my chest. "Are you sure the shelters are full?" I asked softly. She nodded. Everywhere I went they said the same thing. Too many people. Not enough beds. It happens every winter. Her voice was calm. Not bitter. Not angry. Just tired. I didn't know what to say, so we sat in silence again, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the faint sound of church bells somewhere far off. After a few minutes, she turned her head slightly. "You look like you've had a hard night too," she said. I let out a small, humorless laugh. "You could say that." She didn't press for details. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded, like she understood without needing to know the whole story. That simple kindness hit me harder than anything my family had done that night. Here was a woman with nothing. No coat. No shoes. No home. And she still had enough decency to respect my silence. Meanwhile, the people who raised me couldn't even pretend to care. My hands tightened around the sleeves of my coat. The coat. The only real warmth I had left. The only thing standing between me and the freezing night. I tried not to think about it. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility. I was barely holding my own life together. I didn't have a home either. But every time I looked at her feet, that knot in my chest grew tighter. Purple, white, almost gray. I knew what that meant. I looked at her hands. They were shaking, the fingers stiff and red from the cold. She wasn't going to make it through the night like this. The thought came quietly at first. "You have a coat?" Another thought answered it. "And it's the only thing keeping you warm." I swallowed hard. "You might freeze without it." But then another voice, softer but stronger, whispered inside me. "So might she." I closed my eyes for a moment. All night, I'd been thinking about how cruel the world was, how unfair life felt, how my own family had turned their backs on me. And yet, here I was, sitting next to someone who had even less than I did. And she was still kind, still polite, still human. Something inside me shifted. Maybe kindness wasn't about having extra to give. Maybe it was about giving, even when it hurt. I stood up slowly. The woman looked at me, confused. Without saying a word, I slipped off my coat. The cold bit into my skin immediately, sharp and unforgiving. For a second, I hesitated. This was it. The last warm thing I owned. But then I stepped forward and gently draped the coat over her shoulders. Her eyes widened in surprise. Her thin hands reached up, clutching the soft fabric like it was something sacred. She closed her eyes as the warmth settled around her, and I saw tears slide down her cheeks. "Oh, child," she whispered. "You don't have to." "It's okay," I said, my voice shaking from the cold. "You need it more than I do." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression soft and full of something I couldn't quite name. Gratitude, maybe. Or understanding. "What's your name?" she asked gently. I told her. She repeated it slowly, like she was committing it to memory. Then she reached out and took my hands in hers. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was firm. She squeezed once and held my gaze. No words, no speeches. Just a silent exchange between two strangers who suddenly weren't strangers anymore. In that moment, I felt something strange. Peace. Not the kind that comes from comfort or security, but the kind that comes when you know you've done the right thing, even if it costs you. After a few seconds, she released my hands and stood up. The coat hung loosely around her small frame, but it looked warmer than anything she'd been wearing before. She gave me the smallest smile. Then she turned and walked slowly into the fog. I watched her until her figure disappeared into the darkness. And then I sat back down on the bench. The cold hit me like a wave. Without the coat, the air felt 10 times colder. My teeth started chattering almost immediately. My hands felt stiff, and my ears burned from the freezing wind. But something inside my chest felt lighter. For the first time since that door had shut behind me, I didn't feel completely empty. Giving away the last thing I had, had somehow given me back something I didn't even realize I'd lost: my humanity. The moment the woman disappeared into the fog, the silence came rushing back. Only this time, it felt different. The bench was colder without my coat. The wood felt like ice beneath me. My fingers were stiff, and my breath came out in small, shaky clouds. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold in whatever warmth I had left. But the strange thing was, I didn't regret it. Not even a little. All night everything had been taken from me. My job, my home, my place in my family. Every part of my life had been stripped away, one piece at a time. But that coat, that was the one thing I chose to give. And somehow, that made all the difference. For the first time that night, I didn't feel powerless. I didn't feel like a victim of someone else's decisions. I felt human. The cold kept creeping in, though. My teeth chattered, and my feet felt like blocks of ice inside my shoes. Okay, I thought. You need to move. Sitting still in this weather was dangerous. I knew that much. So I stood up, grabbed my suitcase, and started walking again. The streets were nearly empty. Most people were already home with their families, opening gifts early, or preparing for midnight dinners. Every glowing window felt like a reminder of what I didn't have. But the weight in my chest wasn't as heavy anymore. It was strange. I had less than ever. But I felt more at peace than I had in years. Maybe because, for once, I hadn't been trying to prove something. I hadn't been chasing approval. I hadn't been trying to impress anyone. I just helped someone. No expectations. No reward. No audience. Just kindness. After another 15 minutes of walking, I reached the main road. A flickering neon sign buzzed above a small roadside motel. Vacancy. The sign felt like a lifeline. I dragged my suitcase across the cracked parking lot and stepped into the office. The smell of industrial cleaner mixed with stale air hit me immediately. A tired-looking man sat behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. "One night," I said, my voice slightly shaky. "Cheapest room you have?" He glanced at the clock, then at me. $89. I hesitated for a second. That was more than I wanted to spend. But the thought of staying outside all night without a coat made the decision easy. I pulled out my wallet and handed him the cash. He slid a key across the counter. "Room 12. End of the row. No small talk, no questions. Just business." Room 12 looked exactly how I expected it to. Faded carpet. A flickering ceiling light. Bed springs that groaned the moment I sat down. It wasn't warm or welcoming, but it was shelter. And that was enough. I locked the door behind me, dropped my suitcase on the floor, and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence of the room pressed in around me. For the first time since I'd been thrown out, I was alone with my thoughts. I checked my wallet. After paying for the room, I had just over $100 left. Not enough for long. I sighed and opened my laptop. The screen's glow filled the dim room as I started applying for jobs. Any jobs. Positions I was overqualified for. Positions I wasn't qualified for at all. Anything that might bring in a paycheck. Desperation erases pride fast. Hours passed. My stomach growled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since lunchtime. I walked to the vending machine outside and bought a pack of crackers and a bottle of water. Christmas Eve dinner. I sat on the bed, chewing slowly, staring at the cracked paint on the wall. If someone had told me a week ago that this is where I'd be, jobless, alone, eating vending machine crackers in a rundown motel, I would have laughed. Now it was my reality. But as I sat there, something surprising happened. I thought about the woman. About the way her eyes had softened when the coat touched her shoulders. About the way she'd held my hands. About the silent understanding between us. And instead of feeling regret, I felt warmth. Not the physical kind. The emotional kind. The kind that spreads quietly through your chest and reminds you that maybe, just maybe, the world isn't entirely cruel. I didn't know where she was now. I didn't know if she'd found a shelter. I didn't even know her name, but I hoped she was safe. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with me. I closed my laptop and lay down on the creaky bed, pulling the thin motel blanket over my shoulders. It wasn't very warm, but it was something. As I stared at the ceiling, one thought kept circling in my mind. Maybe kindness was the only thing I had left. And maybe that was enough. I didn't know it then, but that small moment on the bench, the choice to give when I had almost nothing, was about to change everything. Not because life is a fairy tale where good deeds always get rewarded, but because sometimes, when you stop looking for rescue, rescue finds you anyway. The motel room was quiet. Too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that makes your thoughts louder. The heater rattled in the corner, struggling like it was about to give up at any moment. Every few seconds, it made a clicking noise that sounded like a tired sigh. I lay on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. The thin blanket barely held any warmth. My hands were still cold from the walk, and without my coat, the room felt colder than it probably was. I kept thinking about the same things, over and over. My father's voice. "You have 20 minutes. My sister's laugh. Don't freeze." The sound of the door locking behind me. It all replayed in my head like a movie I couldn't turn off. At some point, I sat up and reached for my wallet again. I already knew how much was inside, but I counted it anyway. $112. That was all I had left in the world. No job, no home, no family. Just $112, and a cheap motel room that I couldn't afford for more than another night. A strange thought crossed my mind. What if this is it? What if this is the moment everything really falls apart? I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. I wasn't the kind of person who gave up easily. I'd been knocked down before, and I'd always found a way back. But this time felt different. This time, it wasn't just a job or a relationship. It was everything. I opened my laptop again and refreshed my email. Nothing. No responses. No interview requests. No "we'd love to connect." Just silence. I closed the laptop and leaned back against the wall. The room smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and old carpet. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. A muffled voice shouted. Then silence again. Christmas Eve. Most people were probably sitting around a table right now, laughing, passing food, opening gifts. I tried to picture my family. My sister showing off her ring to the guests. My father pouring expensive champagne. My mother smiling politely at everyone like nothing had happened. Would they even mention me? Or would they pretend I never existed? The thought stung more than I expected. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn their approval. Good grades, good jobs, responsible decisions, and in the end, none of it mattered. I wasn't the golden child. So I was disposable. I stood up and walked to the bathroom. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead as I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My hair was messy. My eyes were red. My face looked older than it had that morning. 32. I whispered to my reflection. And starting over from nothing? It sounded even worse out loud. I splashed some cold water on my face and went back to the bed. The springs creaked as I sat down. My thoughts drifted back to the woman on the bench. Her bare feet. Her trembling hands. The way her eyes had softened when I gave her the coat. I wondered where she was now. Maybe she'd found a shelter. Maybe someone else had helped her. Maybe she was sitting in a warm room somewhere, drinking hot soup. I hoped so. Because if she was still out there in the cold, I didn't want to think about that. I lay back down and pulled the thin blanket up to my chin. For a moment, fear crept into my chest. What if tomorrow was worse? What if I couldn't find a job? What if my money ran out? What if I really did end up sleeping in my car, just like my sister joked? The thoughts came one after another, like waves crashing against the shore. But then, another memory pushed its way in. The feeling of the coat leaving my shoulders. The way the woman's face lit up with relief. The gentle squeeze of her hands around mine. And suddenly, the fear didn't feel as strong. Because even at my lowest point, I'd still managed to do something kind. Maybe that mattered more than anything my parents ever said about success. Maybe being a good person was worth more than a trust fund, or a fancy job title. That thought stayed with me as my eyes grew heavy. Outside, a distant church bell rang. Midnight. Christmas had officially begun. No presents, no family, no warm house, just a cheap motel room and a thin blanket. And yet, as I drifted off to sleep, I didn't feel completely empty. Because somewhere out there, a stranger was warmer tonight. Because of me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The phone rang just after sunrise. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The sound felt distant, like it was coming from another room. My body was still heavy with exhaustion, and the thin motel blanket hadn't done much to keep me warm. The phone rang again. I groaned, rolled over, and reached for it on the small bedside table. Unknown number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Nothing good ever seemed to come from unknown numbers. But something inside me said to answer. Hello? My voice sounded rough from sleep. Good morning, a calm, professional voice said. May the first speak with... She said my name perfectly. This is her. There was a short pause, like she was checking something off a list. A car is waiting outside for you. I blinked. I'm sorry. What? A car, she repeated politely. Please gather your belongings and step outside. Someone important would like to speak with you. I sat up, heart suddenly beating faster. This has to be a mistake, I said. I'm at a motel en route. Yes, she interrupted gently. We know exactly where you are. A chill ran down my spine. And it had nothing to do with the cold. Who is this? I asked. You'll understand shortly, she said. Please come outside. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a few seconds, trying to decide if this was some kind of scam, or a prank, or just a wrong number. But curiosity won. I swung my legs off the bed, grabbed my suitcase, and walked to the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the handle. This is ridiculous, I told myself. There's probably nothing out there. I opened the door and froze. The cracked motel parking lot looked completely different from the night before. Lined up in a perfect row were 19 identical black luxury SUVs. Their glossy surfaces reflected the pale morning light, and their engines hummed quietly like a low, powerful chorus. They looked out of place, like a presidential motorcade had taken a wrong turn. Drivers in dark suits stood beside each vehicle, hands folded in front of them, expressions calm and professional. I stepped out slowly, my suitcase rolling behind me. One of the drivers approached me. Good morning, he said politely. Are you? He repeated my name. I nodded, still in shock. He gestured toward the middle vehicle. She's waiting for you. My heart skipped. She? The driver opened the back door of the central SUV. Inside, sitting comfortably against the leather seat, was the elderly woman from the bench. Only now, she looked completely different. Her silver hair was neatly styled. Her posture was straight and confident. And instead of thin, worn clothes, she wore an elegant wool coat that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. But her eyes? They were the same. Warm, kind, knowing. She smiled when she saw me. Good morning, child, she said gently. I was hoping you'd answer the phone. For a moment I just stood there, speechless. You, I whispered. You were on the bench last night. She nodded. Yes, I was. My brain struggled to catch up with reality. The homeless woman. Bare feet. Thin clothes. Shivering in the cold. And now, sitting in the middle of a luxury motorcade. I don't understand, I said. That's perfectly normal, she replied. Please, come sit with me. It's warmer inside. I hesitated for only a second before climbing into the SUV. The door closed behind me with a soft, expensive thud. Warm air wrapped around me instantly. The leather seat felt soft beneath me, and the inside of the car smelled faintly of lavender and something else. Something rich and comforting. For the first time since the night before, I wasn't cold. She studied my face carefully. You didn't sleep much, she observed. I let out a small laugh. It was a long night. Yes, she said softly. It was. We sat in silence for a moment. My mind raced with questions, but I didn't know where to start. Finally, I asked the only thing that made sense. Who are you? She smiled, but there was something deeper behind it. Something almost sad. My name, she said, is Margaret Hale. The name meant nothing to me, but the way she said it, like it carried weight, made me feel like it should. I run a foundation, she continued. And several companies, actually. Most people know me through my work in housing and healthcare. My eyes widened slightly. You're wealthy? She chuckled softly. That's one way to put it. I glanced out the window at the line of SUVs. Why were you out there last night? I asked. On the bench. Without a coat? Her expression turned thoughtful. Every year, she said slowly, on Christmas Eve I go out into the city alone. No security, no money, no warm clothes. I stared at her. Why would you do that? Because, she said, it reminds me what the world really looks like, not from boardrooms or charity galas, but from the street. She paused, her eyes meeting mine. And it helps me see who people really are. A strange feeling settled in my chest. What do you mean? I asked. She smiled again. Last night, dozens of people walked past me. Some looked away. Some pretended not to see me. A few even stepped around me like I was an obstacle on the sidewalk. Her voice softened. But you gave me your coat. I swallowed. It was just a coat. She shook her head gently. No, child, it wasn't. If you walked outside and saw a full motorcade waiting just for you, what would your first thought be? Shock? Fear? Excitement? Tell me in the comments. And if this moment gave you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another unforgettable story. I stared at Margaret, still trying to make sense of everything. The woman who had been barefoot in the freezing cold just hours earlier was now sitting in a luxury SUV, surrounded by a small army of drivers and security personnel. It didn't feel real. You keep saying it wasn't just a coat, I said. But it really was. Anyone would have done the same thing. Margaret tilted her head slightly. No, she said softly. They wouldn't have. Her voice wasn't harsh. It wasn't judgmental. It was simply certain. Do you know how many people walked past me last night? She continued. Businessmen, families, young couples, some of them wearing coats warmer than the one you gave me. She folded her hands in her lap. Not one of them stopped. Not one asked if I was okay, and not one offered me anything. A quiet heaviness settled in the car. I wasn't just cold, she said. I was invisible. Her words reminded me of how I'd felt standing outside my parents' door. How quickly I'd gone from daughter to stranger. Invisible. Margaret seemed to notice the change in my expression. You understand that feeling, don't you? She asked gently. I nodded. Last night, I said, my parents disowned me. They gave everything to my sister. Told me I had 20 minutes to pack and leave. Her eyes softened. And yet, she said, you still chose kindness. I looked down at my hands. It wasn't some grand, noble decision, I admitted. I just couldn't sit there and watch you freeze. Margaret smiled. That's exactly why it mattered. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small leather notebook. Inside were a few pages of handwritten notes. I lost my daughter years ago, she said quietly. She was about your age, kind, compassionate, always looking out for others. Her voice wavered slightly, but she continued. Since then, I've dedicated my life to building something that helps people. Housing programs, medical outreach, education funds. But running organizations like that requires more than money. She looked at me directly. It requires the right people. My heart began to beat faster. What does that have to do with me? I asked. She closed the notebook. Every year on Christmas Eve, I go out and observe. I look for someone who still chooses kindness when they have nothing left to give. I swallowed. And last night, that was you. The words hung in the air between us. You didn't know who I was. You didn't expect anything in return. You simply saw someone suffering, and helped. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I'd like to offer you a position," she said, "at my foundation, not as an assistant or an intern. As part of the leadership team." My eyes widened. "Leadership?" She nodded. "You have experience in marketing and communications, correct?" I blinked. "Yes. But how do you—" She smiled. "My people are very efficient." Of course they were. "You'd help us tell the stories of the people we serve," she continued. "Raise awareness, attract donors, build campaigns that actually make a difference." My mind struggled to process it. "A job?" I whispered. "More than that," she said. "A purpose." My throat tightened. "But you don't even know me," I said. Margaret's eyes held mine. "I know the most important thing about you," she replied. "I know what you do when no one is watching." The words hit me harder than anything my parents had said the night before. Because for the first time, someone wasn't judging me by my resume, my salary, or my mistakes. They were judging me by my heart. "And there's something else," she added. My stomach fluttered with nervous anticipation. "We provide housing for our senior staff," she said. "A small apartment, nothing extravagant, but warm. Safe. Yours, as long as you work with us." I felt tears gathering in my eyes. A home. A job. A second chance. All in the span of a single morning. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. She reached out and gently placed her hand over mine. "Say yes," she said with a soft smile. "And start a new chapter." For a moment, I thought about my parents' mansion. The marble floors. The expensive ornaments. The cold expressions. Then I thought about the bench. The freezing air. The woman with no shoes, who had still looked at me with kindness. "I'd be honored," I said. Margaret's smile widened. "Good," she said. "Because I have a feeling you're going to change more lives than you realize." As the SUV door opened and warm sunlight spilled inside, I realized something. Less than 12 hours earlier, I'd been standing outside a locked door, feeling like my life was over. And now, I was being offered a future I'd never even dreamed of. Not because of my job title, not because of my family name, but because, for one small moment, I chose kindness. 6 months later, I stood in front of a small brick building on the edge of the city, watching families move into their new apartments. Children ran across the sidewalk, laughing and chasing each other. A young couple carried in boxes, their faces glowing with the excitement of a fresh start. An older man stood in the doorway of his unit, staring at the walls like he still couldn't believe they were his. Above the entrance, a simple sign read, "Hale Community Housing Initiative." It wasn't a mansion. There were no marble floors or crystal chandeliers, no catered dinners or imported orchids. But it was warm. It was safe. And most importantly, it was filled with people who finally had a place to belong. I adjusted the stack of brochures in my hands and took a deep breath. 6 months ago, I'd been sitting on a frozen bench, wondering how I'd survive the night. Now, I was the director of communications for one of the largest housing foundations on the West Coast. My job wasn't about selling products anymore. It was about telling real stories. Stories of single mothers who found stability. Stories of veterans who finally had a place to sleep without fear. Stories of people who, like me, had once lost everything and found their way back. Margaret had kept her promise. The apartment she'd offered me was small, just like she said. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a window that overlooked a quiet street lined with trees. But every night when I locked the door behind me, I felt something I'd never truly felt in my parents' mansion. Peace. Not because the apartment was luxurious, but because it was mine. And more importantly, it had been given with kindness, not conditions. Margaret and I had grown close over those months. She never tried to replace my family, and she never pretended to be something she wasn't. But she listened. She encouraged me. And sometimes, when we sat together in her office after long meetings, she'd tell stories about her daughter, about her laugh, her dreams, her stubborn kindness. In those moments, I realized something. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who see you when everyone else looks away. As for my parents and my sister, I heard through mutual acquaintances that the engagement had turned into a lavish wedding. Photos filled social media, designer dresses, champagne towers, and smiling faces. For a while, I thought I'd feel bitter. But I didn't. Because losing that house, losing that inheritance, losing their approval, had led me here. To a life that actually meant something. One afternoon, while we were reviewing a new housing project, Margaret handed me a small, neatly wrapped box. "For you," she said. I opened it slowly. Inside was a long, dark cashmere coat, almost identical to the one I'd given away that night. My throat tightened. "You didn't have to do this." She smiled. "I know. But I wanted to." I ran my hand over the soft fabric, memories of that freezing bench rushing back. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened," I asked, "if I'd kept the coat?" Margaret's expression grew thoughtful. "Then, I would have found someone else," she said gently. "Because the world always gives us chances to choose who we want to be." She paused, then added, "But I'm very glad you chose the way you did." Later that evening, I walked home wearing the new coat. The air was cold, but not unbearable. Christmas lights had started appearing in the windows again, just like they had the night everything changed. Only this time when I looked at those glowing windows, I didn't feel like an outsider. Because I finally understood something. Family isn't about money. It isn't about trust funds or last names or perfect reputations. Family is about the people who catch you when you fall. The ones who see your heart. And choose you anyway. And sometimes, it starts with a simple act of kindness on a freezing Christmas Eve. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. You never know who might need to hear a story like this today. And before you go, rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Because here, at Silent Echoes of the Heart, every story carries a lesson. And every lesson has the power to change a life.